In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the data analysis tool to calculate various summary statistics to describe our central tendency, our spread, and the shape of our data. This topic assumes that the data comes from a sample. In the next lesson, we'll learn the same topic, but if used when your data comes from the entire population, and that's called descriptive statistics. But in this case, we're using summary statistics because we're using only a sample of the data. The following data, the data on the spreadsheet, are data that we're taking on 3 different patients, and it's the number of episodes experienced by 3 patients from December 1st to December 16th. The 3 patients are Tina, Leon, and Carrie Crow. On December 1st, none of the patients had an incident, had an episode. In the next day, however, Tina had 1 episode, Leon had 2 episodes, and Carrie Crow had 1 episode. So this is what our data looks like. But this is only a sample of the data because we want to use the data that occurred on these days to infer something about how the patient is today, which is some date later than December 16th. So our data is inputted in, these are the dates, this is Tina's column, this is Leon's column, and this is Carrie Crow's column. Now to analyze this data, I'll go up to Tools and I'll click on the Tool menu. Then I will click on Data Analysis. Now data analysis is usually at the very bottom of the screen. If you don't find data analysis, you'll need to go back to Lesson 1 to see how to install it. Let's click on Data Analysis. And when I do, a submenu comes up. This is a dialog box with other choices in it. In this case, what I want to do is I want to look for descriptive statistics. So I'm going to click on Descriptive Statistics, and then I'm going to click OK. And I get a menu that looks like this. Now in this case, I need to put the range of our data. Let's take a look at our data to see where our data begins. The top left part of our data is in B2. This is the top left, and it goes all the way down to D17. And that's what I would put if I were to use a statistical function. However, when I'm using the data analysis, I like to include the labels up here. This tells me this data is Tina's row. This label tells me this is Leon's row. This label tells me this is Carrie Crow's. So in this case, I want to take from B1 down to D17. Now I could just type that in. I could just type in B1 colon B17. But there's other ways I could enter that data. Another way I could enter that data is I could click on this that little thing that has the red in it. And actually, let me go back to that. This is what it looks like. It's got a little red thing and little 2 blue things. But when I click on that, I get this. And then I can click on the first cell I want, which in this case is B1, and go all the way down to D17. Now when I let go of my mouse button, I've got ants marching around all the data, and then I can go click on this meter, and you can see that my data has been entered. It says $B, $1, colon, $D, $17. And this is what I wanted, from cell B1 to cell D17. Now you're probably wondering, where do all those money signs come from? Well, the answer to that is that this is a Microsoft product, and it's owned by Bill Gates. And wherever Bill Gates is associated, just money signs just seem to come up. Actually, there is a reason for the money signs, but it's just too detailed to go into here, and I don't want to confuse you with this kind of side matters. Another way I could do this, if I'm using XP or later, you might even be able to do this in some of the earlier versions, is I'll move this a little bit to the side, and instead of clicking on this, I could just go directly to here and highlight the data, and then when I let go, it just automatically goes back. And that's easier, I think, than clicking on here and then clicking on that other meter thing, but this only works in later versions, I think. The next thing I have to do is say whether the data is grouped by columns or by rows. If I had this clicked as rows, then what it would do is it would analyze, give me the standard deviation for this, or the mean for this day, the mean for this day, but I don't want it by dates, I want it by these individuals, so mine is by columns. Now I need to put a check mark in labels in first row. That's going to label my data with these names Tina, Leon, and Carrie Crow. If I were not to click this, it would mistakenly believe that these were data points, and it would actually tell me it's an error. It would say, hey, we can't work with numbers. Now, the data analysis tool works a little bit different than functions. If I were to do this in a function and include words, it would just ignore the words and just deal with the numbers. However, if I'm using the data analysis tool, if the place I says has data has a word, it'll say, you've made an error. Correct something. So it won't let me have words. It will let me have blank spaces, and it'll treat it the same way as a function by just ignoring it in most cases. But if there's a word where you say there's data, it'll come back and tell you there's an error, and it won't quite let you do that. The next thing we want to do is I'm going to do the output range. The output range is where do you want us to put the answer? And in this case, I'm going to put, I'll put F2 down. F2. And this is saying where do I want the top left part of the answer. So I'll put it here in F2. And now I need to say what it is I want it to output. And I'm going to click on Summary Statistic. Notice there's also a confidence level for the mean. That's something we'll deal with a little bit later. But all I really want this time is a summary statistic. Then I'll come over here and I'll click the OK button, and it will put my data. Here's the answers in this gray area. Notice that the top left cell is in F2, which is right where I told it to put it. And then it just puts all the rest of the data. But this is too scrunched up and very hard for me to read. So for me to unscrunch these cells, one thing I could do is I could go to Format, and then I can go to Column, and then I can go to AutoFit Selection. Now you need to be careful here, because if you go to Format, sometimes you'll see something that says Format Auto Format, and you're tempted to do that. Don't. Go Format, then to Column before you go to AutoFit. AutoFit is different from Auto Format. So Format, Column, and then you go to AutoFit Selection. And that will spread things out so that they're readable. In this case, let's take a look at what the output is. I'll click on any other cell just to get rid of the blue color. In this case, I can see for Tina, the mean is 3.18 episodes. For Leon, the mean is 3.93. And for Carrie, the mean was 3. I can see the standard error is this number, 0.526. The median is 3. The mode, it says, is 3. But that tells me that at least I know that 3 is a mode. What I don't know is if it's the only mode. It tells me the sample standard deviation. This is a standard deviation calculated as if this is a sample, which it is in our case. But this is why it would be wrong to use this with the population, is because standard deviation is computed differently when you're using an entire population. This also tells us our sample variance, our kurtosis, our skewness, our range, our minimum number, our lowest number, our highest number, the sum. What if we added up all of Tina's episodes? How many total episodes did she have during that period of time? And she had 51. And how many days did we count? We counted 16 days. I can see the same for Leon, the same type of data. I can see the same type of data for Carrie Crow. And you can see why putting these labels makes this much more readable, our answer much more readable. If I weren't to include the data, the labels, then all this would say is column 1, column 3. It would tell me some column number, but it wouldn't make it really clear to me what's involved. Now what I'd like to do is redo what we just did, but using a little different option, where instead of putting the results on the same page where the data are, we'll put the results on a separate sheet. So the way we do that is we would go back to Tools, go to Data Analysis, and Data Analysis will remember what we did last. It will remember that we did descriptive statistics, so I'll just click on OK. It remembers where the data are, B1 to D17, and it remembers that we wanted columns. It remembers we had labels in first row, and it remembers everything we did. Now what I'm going to do is change this output range to New Worksheet Ply. Now I could give this a name and it would come out on a separate page, a separate sheet. Right now our data is on sheet 1. This would put our answer on some other sheet. If I put no name, it'll just take the next sheet. If I had sheet 1, 2, 3 already here, it would name this sheet 4 by default. In this case, if I put nothing, it'll say sheet 2. But I'm going to say, I'll call this episodes. I'll just make it short. I'll just call it epi. And then I'll click on OK, and it created a new page. It created a page, an epi page, and it has my data. It's still squished, so I'll go Format, I'll go Column, I'll go AutoFit Selection. Alternatively, instead of doing that, if I wanted to, I could, that's my undo button, by the way. That's a very important button to know about if you make as many mistakes as I do. When all the data is highlighted, I can double-click right next to any of these lines that separate, say, D from E or E from F. If I double-click, see how that row automatically fits the data. So I could just double-click on each of those if I wanted to. Oh, it's being stubborn. There we go. Or if, just notice if my cursor is here, it's like an arrow pointing to the entire column. Or when it hits right here, it becomes this kind of cross with two arrows to the sides. When it's like that, I can resize by holding down my mouse button and dragging it any size I want it to be, and then letting go. So that's how you can resize your columns. By the way, you can also resize your rows that way. It looks ugly, but let me go here. I'll go between the 4 and 5. I'll push down my button. I'll go like that, and now row 4 is a very tall column. So you can resize everything. That was just a little aside. We've covered everything we need to cover in this lesson. Thank you very much.